May I first of all, as I always do, start some introductions. If I may, I have with me two colleagues this morning. But first of all, my name is Councillor Bob Braun. I'm the convener of the LRB. As I say, I have two councillors with me. All of us are members of the Planning Committee. To my right at the moment, I have Bailey Claire McLaren. And online today, unusually, Councillor Ian James. To my far right is Mr. Ross Burton. He's a planning advisor to the LRB, who is not part of the planning department and has had no previous involvement with any of the applications on the agenda today. To my left is Mr. Colin Elliott, our legal advisor for this morning, and to his far left is Jessica Guild from our committee services department. So first of all, may I ask members, do we have any declarations of interest? Bailey McLaren.
No, none.
Thank you. And Councillor James?
None for me, the convener, thanks.
Thank you very much. Now, can we approve the minutes of the last meeting, which is number 3.1 on our agenda? Are we happy to approve? Yep. Agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. And therefore, that will lead us on to our first case of the day. This is item 4.1, and it involves the installation of replacement windows at Hill House, Upper Allen Street, Blairgowrie. And I'm going to ask Mr. Burton if he would introduce the case. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take you through the pictures first. If you could put the first picture up, please. You can see that the application site, the application property, is a substantial detached house on the corner of Upper Allen Street and Kirkwynd. It's in the conservation area in Blairgowrie, and it's as you can see, it's surrounded by similar detached houses largely. Further down Kirkwynd, the houses become smaller, closer to the road, but in that area they tend to be similar to the application property. Next slide, please. This is a picture from Upper Allen Street of the property. You can see it's some of the windows. You can see the conservatory. The application is for the replacement of the windows, which you'll see, which are white timber. The conservatory is not part of the application. Next slide, please. So closer up to the wall, you can see the house is fairly close to the wall on Upper Allen Street, and the upper floor windows are quite visible. Next slide, please. And this is from Kirkwynd, taken through the gate into the house. Again, you can see the windows there are quite visible. The windows appear to be in a good state of repair. Next slide, please. Standing just inside the gate, you can see the windows a bit more closely. Next slide, please. And that's from inside the garden. Next slide, please. And the rear of the garden showing the conservatory, which, as I've mentioned, is not included in this application. Next slide, please. And that's showing from Kirkwynd the only other window which isn't proposed for renewal. That's the window which has the inner glazing bars, which lights the stair, the landing, and is and that would be remaining as is. All the other windows which are white that have been shown in the photographs are proposed to be replaced. While I was there, the applicant pointed out some other houses nearby which had PVC windows, and he asked me in particular to note one which is in the next slide, and that's quite close by. You can see the dormer windows of that house are UPVC. It's an old house. It's a smaller house. It's on Kirkwynd, and the windows at street level are also PVC. Thank you. Could you go back to the original? Thank you. So the application is for the replacement of all the windows, 24 windows, apart from the conservatory and the window lighting the first floor level. The windows proposed for replacement are mostly timber framed and original. the new windows would all have UPVC frames. Property isn't listed, but it's within Blairgowrie Conservation Area. To summarise the applicant's case, the applicants have lived in the property since 1980 and wish to improve it by replacing the single glazed timber windows, which are not suitable for supporting current alternative forms of heating, with double glazed units which would retain more heat. The house is largely surrounded by high stone walls, so most of the windows are not visible from the street. The large decorative window at first floor landing level, which is visible from Kirk Wynd, is not proposed for replacement. Many other properties in the immediate vicinity have UPVC windows fitted. Many houses on Kirk Wynd, adjacent to the property, have UPVC windows fitted, and there are 3 houses near the application property in Upper Allen Street which have UPVC windows. In addition, the care home on the opposite side of Kirk Wynd, a substantial older property, has UPVC windows which are visible from the street. To summarise the report of handling, the property is within the Blairgowrie Conservation Area, so Policy 28A of the Local Development Plan, Conservation Areas, and Policy 31, Other Historic Environment Assets, are relevant, as well as Policies 1A and 1B, Placemaking, and Policy 17, Residential Areas. Policy 28A seeks to preserve and enhance the character and appearance of the conservation area. It states that the design materials, scale and siting of new developments should be appropriate to the conservation area. This is the first reason for refusal. Policy 31 seeks to protect and preserve non-designated, which means not listed, historic assets, and that is used for reason 2 in the reasons for refusal. The replacement of the traditional windows with UPVC frame windows, which have thicker frames and a tilt opening facility, would fail to preserve or enhance the conservation area or the application property, which, while not listed, has an architectural quality which makes a positive contribution to its surroundings and the conservation area. Instead of the UPVC windows proposed, the Planning Authority would look for traditional materials to be used as a like-for-like replacement, and it's noted that no information has been submitted to indicate that the windows are beyond repair or refurbishment. There were no representations on the application. Material considerations, Policies 21A and 31 of the Local Development Plan have been correctly identified as the policies most relevant to the proposal. The use of UPVC windows to replace traditional windows in properties in the immediate vicinity and within the conservation area is also a material consideration, as they have had an impact on the character of the conservation area. Some observations on the application. The desire to reduce heat loss from traditional buildings is something that central government and Perth and Kinross Council both support because of the climate emergency. Central questions for the committee to consider are whether the proposed window replacements using non-traditional materials are acceptable here as departures from the local development plan, given the above, and given the other examples of non-traditional materials used for replacement windows in the immediate vicinity. Thank you. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. I'll open now for questions. Bailey McLaren, any questions?
To be honest, not overly. You know, it's a lot clearer now that we're looking at a map, a visual of the dominance of the property and where it sits within others surrounding it. And the condition of the windows are quite clear from the pictures.
No questions, fine. Councillor James, any questions?
No questions, thanks, convener. Quite happy with the presentation and what we've got before us. Thanks.
I just have one question, Mr. Burton. Going back to the picture we had of a window which is not to be replaced. I understand all the windows from the report at the moment are all single glazed, not double glazed. One of the stairs not replaced. Is that double glazed already, or is there any reason why it's not? I understand that's single glazed. Single glazed. See a reason for it not being replaced.
I do. Sorry. I would imagine that the reason that's not proposed for replacement is because it is decorative, and it's the applicants want to keep that as part of the character of the house. It's more important for the character of the house, perhaps, than the other windows that are proposed for replacement.
Thank you very much. So, members, with further questions, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? that is the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Bailey McLaren.
Happy to proceed.
And Councillor James.
Likewise, convener.
Okay. And I too am happy to continue. So we'll now move to debate, and on this occasion, if I may, I will lead. This is one of those situations where we have to decide a situation over the question of double glazing in a conservation area. We have to take into account, of course, the fact that there is a conservation area, and any decision I think we make must be clearly stated that it's not setting a precedent. The conservation rules are laid down in the LDP, but on the other side of the coin, of course, as we know, we are living in a time when there is a concern about energy efficiency in houses to mitigate climate change. So that's two sides of this to look at. There is another factor here as well, and that is, of course, that many of the houses surrounding this property have already got double glazing utilising UVPC, and not just nearby. These are houses in the immediate vicinity. And I note the comment of the planner that these may have been installed prior to this being designated conservation area, but nonetheless, they are there and they are making those houses energy efficient. Taking all that into account, on this occasion, and taking it in this case as it is, and not setting any form of precedent, I'm inclined to allow the appeal in this case. I think it would be wrong to penalise the applicants not being able to replace the windows when other houses around them have already been done. It seems unusual to deny them. I appreciate that wood would be preferable, but wood is expensive and we have to allow for that as well. But it's not a material consideration in a planning situation. However, as I say, I'm inclined to agree the appeal on this occasion, taking all those factors into account, but making quite clear in my presentation here that I'm not setting the precedent for the conservation area. It's purely because of the factors involved in this particular property. So I'm working on the basis that I would grant the appeal. Bailey McLaren.
Thank you. Yeah, my thoughts are very similar to yours, Councillor Braun. Conservation area, very, very aware of upholding the conservation of areas of importance, but current focus with regard to energy emissions from properties or making properties more energy efficient is of importance, and equally surrounding properties in very close proximity, it would be unfair to go against. So I too would support your thoughts and passing the application.
Thank you. Councillor James.
It'll be a full house today then, convener, I think. Everything that I was going to say, you've both said already, to be honest. What I would add, though, is that manufacturing has certainly come on leaps and bounds. They're not trying to replace something with something that doesn't look right. They're replacing sash windows with sash windows, just the material. And in this day and age, I really don't have an issue with that for all the reasons you've already mentioned. I was just also a bit perplexed by the reason for refusal about inappropriate detailing. Looking at the plans I saw there, I didn't see any detailing on the windows proposed, but I don't know, perhaps I missed something. But that aside, I'm quite happy to allow the appeal. Thank you, convener.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Elliott, is there anything we need to do? For once, a unanimous start to the...
Yes, convener, just to clarify one point for minute taking purposes, yes, all members have agreed to allow the review, which would be granted subject to suitable conditions and informatives, but it's the reasoning I want to clarify. I heard potentially a slight difference in what, your reasoning. What I want to know is whether you consider it's contrary to the LDP, contrary to conservation area, perhaps because it's UPVC, but then you're considered there are other factors that mitigate it? Or are you saying that no, it doesn't have a significant impact on the conservation area and therefore accords with the LDP, if you understand the difference? Councillors Braun and McLaren seem to be going down the line of saying, and I do say seemed, I might be wrong here, of saying that although it's UPVC, there are other factors that justify it. The way Councillor James indicated, it seemed to be more, no, I'm satisfied with it and it doesn't affect the conservation area. So I just want to be clear exactly, and I appreciate I was paraphrasing there, Councillor James. Are you in agreement that, I suppose pose the question, are you in agreement that although it's UPVC, which can have effect in the conservation area, that there are other factors, namely the other properties in the area with UPVC and the ability for the energy conservation that it should be granted? That seemed to be the way the majority of you were going.
That's the way I was thinking of it in my mind.
And I see Councillor James is nodding his head, so it seems to be agreed.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, completely,
Okay, yeah.
Mr. Elliott. It's probably just the way I came across.
Yes, I just wanted to be clear. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay, fine. So that's a unanimous decision on 4-1. So that's a good start to the day. We'll now move on to item 4.2. This is to do with an extension to a dwelling house and formation of roof terrace at 51 Muirs in Kinross. So again, I'll ask Mr. Burton to introduce.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take you through the pictures of the site first. You can see the house on the screen there is a detached house with the Muir Street to one side, an access road leading to the car park for rugby club to the rear, to the side, and the car park is to the rear, and the Muir's Inn on the other side. On the north side is the hall of the is the church hall. The site is quite small. The house has been has been amended previously. If we could see the next slide. Yeah, the front porch has been replaced by a contemporary styled front porch, and the house has been either repainted or reclad. This new proposal is seen as part of the refurbishment process that the current owners are pursuing. Next slide, please. This slide shows the rear of the house, and that's the boundary with the church. So you can see the, sorry, that is the front of the house, I beg your pardon, looking down the side of the house to the boundary to the church. So you can see the side of the house is quite close to the boundary at the moment. The next slide is the rear of the house, which shows the garden is not large, and the extension would take up a fair bit of the far part of the garden. You can see how close the church hall is to the boundary on that picture. Next slide, please. And that's just showing the whole depth of the garden. The garden ends at the hedge there. Next slide, please. This is right up against the boundary to the church, looking towards the gap between the two church halls. And the next slide shows it from the other side. That's the part of the church property that would be overlooked by the extension, by the roof terrace. It's clearly not used for much at the moment. Next slide, please. I think that might be the end. Yeah. Okay, we're back to the. So the extension is for the proposal rather is for a two-story extension to the dwelling house and formation of a roof terrace. The roof extension would have a large lounge dining room on the ground floor, and then a smaller extension to the main bedroom on the upper floor. A large roof terrace is proposed on top of most of the ground floor extension, which should be flat roofed. The applicant's case. The applicant has renovated the application property to a contemporary standard. A flat roof extension has been built to the front, and it's suggested that a similarly flat roofed extension would be acceptable to the rear. The case officer has described the proposed extension as a wraparound, which it is not. It only projects from the rear wall of the house and does not project from the side of the house. The design ensures the height of the extension is as low as possible, and attention is drawn to a two-storey flat-roofed extension in place at the adjacent Muir's Inn. A two-storey extension to the roof of the rugby club, or to the rugby club rather, with a roof terrace adjacent to the rear of the application property has also recently been approved by the council. The proposal has been discussed with the planning officer for the council, who concluded that the privacy aspects would be acceptable, and with a representative of the adjacent church, who, after asking for changes which were agreed, has confirmed in writing that they have no objection to the proposal. To summarise the report of handling, the principal policies are 1A and 1B, placemaking, and 17, policy 17, residential areas, and policy 27A, listed buildings of the local development plan. The council's placemaking guide states that extensions should respect the shape, scale, and proportions of the existing building, that balconies and roof gardens will generally be resisted where there are privacy concerns, and that roof terraces should avoid being too close to boundaries, overlooking neighbouring properties, dominating or detracting from the appearance of the house, and having over-dominant lighting that would adversely impact on neighbours. While there are no directly adjacent residential properties which would be affected, the roof terrace would have an imposing impact on its surroundings to the detriment of the amenity of the area and the adjacent church memorial garden. The proposals would not have a detrimental effect on the setting of the adjacent listed church, but the proposal is listed as being contrary to placemaking policies 1A and 1B. One representation was received from the vestry chair of the church, who wrote to confirm that they have no objection to the proposals following discussions of the application and the revisal of the proposal. Material considerations. Placemaking policies 1A and 1B are correctly identified. Policy 27, listed buildings, is also a material consideration. Some observations. The proposed roof terrace would not overlook any residential properties, so would not give rise to any privacy issues. The fact that the council granted planning permission for a roof terrace at first floor level at the adjacent rugby club is also relevant. Thank you, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. I'll open it to questions. Councillor James.
Sorry, convener. Yeah, sorry, Mr. Ross, sorry, Mr. Burton. The extension is to the rear of the property, did you say, and not to the side? Because my understanding was, as the planning officer said, it's a wraparound.
That you're correct, councillor. It's to the rear of the property. It does extend slightly beyond the gable wall of the house, which is perhaps what the case officer was referring to, but it's not a wraparound extension to the extent that it extends the gable of the house.
Thank you.
Bailey McLaren, any questions?
Yeah, my question is, do you have any more information on one of the reasons for refusal being the excessive height? In what respect have the officers identified that?
The upper part of the extension, the second floor, has a flat roof which projects slightly above the eaves level of the existing house. If the flat roof is there of the upper floor extension is there, as the applicant says, to keep the height as low as possible, it's still above eaves level, and it's the judgment of the case officer that in itself makes it excessive.
Thank you.
I have one question too, Mr. Burton. That's just a question is, how visible would the extension be? I can see, I'm looking at the plan in front of us. We've got Muir's. I presume it's a side turning in to access other properties, just above the bottom of the picture. Is it really going to be very visible from the main road? I know there's a slight overhang which shows up in one of the drawings on page 105, but the picture of the gap between the house and the fence of the church property is so narrow you probably wouldn't even notice it down there. So is there much of a sign of it from the road, from the public side of it?
I don't think there would be, councillor. I think you're correct. It would be highly visible, obviously, from the car park of the rugby ground, and from the access drive, for anybody using that access drive. But I think you're correct in stating that it wouldn't be very visible at all from Muirs Road.
Fine. Thank you very much for the questions passed. Members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor. Or do we require more information? Councillor James?
I think I have enough information. Thanks, convener.
And Bailey McLaren?
Happy to proceed.
So, members, we can now move to debate. Yes, I'm happy as well. Thank you. Yes. So we'll now move to debate. Can I ask Councillor James, having considered the applicant's papers, report of handling, Perth and Kinross local development plan, and all other relevant material planning considerations, could I ask you to start, please?
Yeah, thanks, convener. And for Mr. Elliott's purposes, Councillor Braun's always happy. I'm caught between a rock and a hard place on this one, convener. You know, I see where they're coming from. No objections, but there's always a but. It's a small plot in the first place, and I tend to agree with the planning officer on this one. The height above the eaves level is unacceptable, and it's just taking up the whole of the back garden pretty much. You know, and too big for such a small spot, albeit nobody's, you know, the overlooking aspect has been dealt with. I still have reservations about that as well anyway, but in this instance, I think the planning officer's actually got the right decision. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor. I'll come in second then behind that, and I'm happy to move to debate. I'm afraid I'm going to be slightly different to you on this one, Councillor. When it comes to properties, one of my thoughts is that an extension to a property is that this is the property of the owner. It's their decision to build an extension. They take the risk because obviously any extension, whichever it is, in respect of this one, it will affect the saleability of their house possibly, and in time the value of that property, but they take the risk. In this instance, the applicants feel that this is the right extension for them. That may not be what future buyers consider, and that's a risk that they take. However, we always must take concern of the residential amenity of people around those extensions. In this case, there isn't anybody around the houses. There's a church facility next door, which is very narrow, very small, and they've already agreed that they're happy for this to proceed. And there's a inn on the other side and a rugby ground. So there's no residential amenity involved in this one as such. And as we've heard, it's not going to be easily seen from the public road. And although there's a slight overhang on one side, it's so narrow between the property and the fence, the boundary fence of next door, that you probably wouldn't even notice it. So in this instance, subject to normal conditions, I would allow the appeal. As I say, it's the risk taken by the applicant. There's no residential amenity with other properties involved. Therefore, I would be happy with the appeal on this occasion. So I'll hand over now to Bailey McLaren.
Yeah, as Councillor James has alluded to, rock in a hard place. I'm very much drawn to, you know, the officers, the excessive height and dominance of the roof terrace, and I just can't seem to pass by that, because I would see it to be dominant, overly dominant to the property and the surrounds. So I am voting to uphold the officer's decision for refusal.
Thank you very much, Bailey McLaren. So we have a 2-1 decision on this, just to show that we don't always agree. So I'll hand over now to Mr. Elliott to finalise the points.
Thank you, Convener. What I've noted down is by a majority the review application has been refused in line with the applied officer's decision, which is grounds of refusal, which is page 79, grounds 1 and 2, and the minority opinion from Councillor Braun If I've summed up correctly, Councillor Braun, essentially you think it accords with the local development plan on this occasion
On this isolated occasion, yes. Yeah.
because of not having the an impact, etc.
On other properties, on
Yeah.
private properties, yes.
Okay, it's fine.
Fine, thank you very much. So we will now move on to item 4.3. This is the erection of a dwelling house land 400 metres southeast of Hawk Cottages East. Oh, I don't know how you pronounce it. Hawk, is it? Hawk. You're the gentleman involved in that one, yeah. Thank you. Okay, fine. So I'll ask now Mr. Burton to introduce the case.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take you through the pictures first. The cottage itself, the application site itself, you can see in the red line there, is in a wooded area, not far from the East Hawk cottages that you see towards the bottom of the screen in a grouping. Next picture, please. That's the access road leading from the existing cottages towards the application site. Next slide, please. And that you can see a kind of gate feature on the right-hand side of the road there. That is the entrance to the application site, which lies beyond it. Next slide, please. And looking from within the site back to the gate feature, you can see the site is slightly raised. So I'm looking down onto the road. Next slide, please. This is looking into the site towards where the cottage would be. The cottage would be slightly behind this this picture, to be honest, to the right. Next slide, please. Now you can see some trees marked there, and if you look very closely, you can see some posts that are fixed to the ground to delineate the sort of development platform, if you like. I don't know, but I'm taking the marked trees to be the ones which need to be which are proposed to be felled. It wasn't. There was no notification on site to say that, so I'm just surmising that's the case. Next slide, please. And that's from the other side. You can see there's a bit of a clearing in the middle there, some marked trees round about it. Next slide, please. And that's looking at the clearing from another angle. That's probably quite a good slide to leave it at rather than the other slides, because that shows you the site within the woodland while I make my presentation. So a single story 2-bedroom house which constructed of timber within a wooded site which is part of a 5-hectare woodland which is managed by the applicant is proposed. The site is remote, with the nearest houses being approximately 150 metres away and invisible from the application site. The building would be slightly elevated on site to minimise its impact on local wildlife and would have a flat green roof. The applicant seeks to be as self-sufficient as possible with vegetable plots and beehives. 22 trees have been identified as requiring to be felled for the building and access, and which would leave approximately 100 trees remaining after this clearance within the application site. The applicant proposes to plant 25 replacement trees, which will be oak trees from locally gathered seeds in the woodland to the south of the application site. So to summarise the applicant's case, the intention is to deliver a low-impact, sustainable dwelling which would allow the applicant to manage the surrounding woodland. The proposal is considered to comply with Category 3, subsection 3.5 of Policy 19 of the Local Development Plan, which can allow new houses in the countryside for sustainable living. The proposal has been specifically designed to thrive in a woodland setting. Its design is contemporary, and it will be raised from the ground to enhance its passive house standards and to preserve the ecology beneath it. The timber cladding has been designed to tie in with surrounding woodland, and its location within the site ensures that it will be largely invisible from the road. Raised beds and livestock pens would allow the residents to cultivate food on site and to be as self-sufficient as possible. The tree report confirms that the drainage infrastructure required would not have a detrimental impact on the woodland. So the proposal is considered to comply with the requirements of the local development plan. To summarise the report of handling, the application is assessed against Policy 19 of the Local Development Plan, Housing in the Countryside, which identifies 6 categories of development which can be supported. Category 3 considers new houses in the countryside under supplementary guidance. 2 subcategories within the supplementary guidance apply. 3.3, which can provide housing where there's a clear agricultural need or other rural business need for a key worker accommodation, and 3.5, which can support pilot projects creating eco-friendly houses where a rural location is required. In this case, it's not considered that the management of a 5 hectare woodland requires an on-site presence, so the proposal does not comply with Category 3.3 of the guidance. Category 3.5 requires the development to be for a one-off bespoke house at the forefront of sustainability. Proposals have to be genuinely innovative in terms of energy generation, sustainability and construction. The house is proposed to be constructed to passive house standards with a heat recovery ventilation system and living roof. While it would be low impact in terms of its design, construction materials and systems, such designs, construction methods and power and heating systems are now relatively standard. They are not considered to demonstrate the level of innovation required to meet the terms of this category of the guidance. Accordingly, it's considered that the proposal does not comply with Policy 19 of the Local Development Plan and is therefore contrary to the development plan. There are no representations received. Material considerations. Policy 19 of the Local Development Plan is correctly identified as the most relevant material considerations. The 2 subsections of the supplementary guidance identified in the handling report are correctly identified as the relevant parts of that policy against which the proposal must be assessed. Some observations on the proposal. The committee needs to consider whether the proposal is innovative enough in its design, materials and systems, and the applicant's stated aim of sustainable living supported by vegetables grown on site and livestock reared on site is enough to justify the proposal in terms of Policy 19, in particular the supplementary guidance. Thank you, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. We'll open up for questions. I'll have a question first this time, if I may. Going back, there was a plan you put up first of all with the actual site with a square red, which was I presume the boundary site. That one there. I mean, I presume that's all the land that's coming under the ownership of the applicant. Not
The applicant owns
the whole.
woodland on either side.
Right. Okay.
5 hectares of woodland, which is. Beg your pardon, forgot again. I'll try and remember. The applicant owns woodland either side of, or to 3 sides of the application site, extending to 5 hectares. So a fairly significant stretch of woodland which stretches east and west of the application site and is bounded by the roads that you can see in the map about in front of you.
So would that amount of woodland need much management at all? I mean, is this just? I thought you would leave woodland just to grow on its own.
I'm not an expert on these matters,
No,
councillor, but I don't think management of woodland requires a huge input on a daily basis or weekly basis.
Fine, thank you. Bain McLaren, any questions?
I just noting that there is no Scottish Water are stating that there is no infrastructure accessible nearby, so therefore water supply would likely be from a private water supply. So that would in turn disrupt the woodland area in the sourcing and securing of water. Would that be correct?
I would imagine so, councillor. To bring a water supply on site would need some form of trenching to bury pipes and so on. So I would imagine you're correct. Just how much of an impact I couldn't say because we don't have any drawings to suggest one or the other.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Councillor James.
Sorry, no further questions. I think there's a lot of information in the paperwork, and the questions I was going to ask have already been asked. Thank you.
Thank you, members. Then can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? And just before I forget, I'm happy to proceed. So, Bailey McLaren.
Happy to proceed.
And Councillor James.
Happy as well, convener.
Thank you very much. So, we'll now move to the debate. Can I ask Bailey McLaren, having considered the applicant's papers, the report of handling, Perth and Kinross local development plan, and all other relevant material planning considerations, can I ask you to start?
Thank you, convener. So, considering the report from Mr. Burton, and my conclusion is that I would be upholding the officer's decision under the policy, wait till I find that, 3.5, as the property is not a sector-leading innovative pilot design project. That is of, I see that to be of note, and equally the agricultural need or other rural business justification for key worker accommodation is loose. So I would uphold the officer's decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Bailey McLaren. Councillor James.
Yeah, thanks, convener. And like Bailey McLaren, lots of uncertainties here. You know, the lack of water and drainage to this site worries me, and as they've applied for it under 3.5, the housing in the countryside guidance, the second paragraph of 3.5 clearly states to be acceptable under this category must firstly be demonstrated that houses in a rural setting is essential an integral part of overall scheme for the management or use of land, which will allow its occupants to be self-sufficient. Whilst there are some everyday goods which cannot be produced locally, proposals must include cultivation of land to produce crops and rear livestock at a scale to ensure the household will not depend on car travel, everything else. I don't feel it meets any of that. They were advised to move their vegetable beds into the sunshine, but chose to investigate the growing of vegetables in shaded areas instead. I don't think it actually meets the sustainability criteria which they say it does. So I'm happy to uphold what the officer has already recommended, which is refusal. Thank you, convener.
Thank you, Councillor James. With myself now, the holding point of this is category 3.5 of the supplementary guidance, which requires a property to be innovative in design, to be a one-off bespoke property. The window for that innovative design is narrowing. We have solar panels on houses are common, heat pumps are common, passive house building is now becoming very common. Therefore, in my mind, it's very difficult to get a house to qualify under this section now, 3.5, because of the changes that we are seeing and which are becoming common. If we take 3.5 out of the equation, then really and truly the whole thing falls. And on that basis, given that this is not really innovative in my mind, it doesn't meet criteria 3.5, and therefore the application fails, and therefore I'm of a consideration, as my colleagues are, that we should accept the refusal as stated. So I'll now pass over to Mr. Elliott.
Thank you, convener. I think that's clear that all three members have refused the review. Just to ask you, directed to page 141, which are the grounds of refusal, is it correct that you're refusing in line with those grounds, or you're looking for any changes?
I would suggest a slight change to reason 1, just another sentence at the end, and I was thinking along the lines of, in particular, it has not been satisfactorily demonstrated that the proposal meets category 3.5 houses for sustainable living for a one-off bespoke house required on the land. And if we're being pedantic, I don't know if we need to do it, but on item 2, it says policy 1A, it should be policy 1A and 1B brackets B, but that's been pedantic perhaps, but that would be my changes.
Okay, I've kind of got that down in terms of you're adding the justification, if you like, to ground 1, just a very moderate change to ground 2, just clarifying which category and 1BB. Just check, Councillors McLaren and James, that you agree with that.
100%, thank you.
Yes, I agree. Thank you.
Thank you, members. We'll now move on to item 4.4. And this is the alteration extension to a dwelling house and the erection of a garage and formation of a vehicular access at Clover Cottage, Kinross Holdings, West Kinross. And again, Mr. Burton, if I can ask you to introduce the case.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take you through the pictures first. The site you can see on the screen in front of you, a triangular site bounded by the old Dundee Road to the north, by the M90, a bit more distance to the south, by a small cottage to the south, and there's a bund on the east side of it, which you can kind of make out there, which is treed, and there's a tree line between Dundee Road and the application site, and as you can see, there's a fairly significant tree belt between the M90 and the application site, which is also rising. Next slide, please. So coming in from the Dundee Road, you can see the house within its surroundings. It's a fairly traditional type of house for the area, and it looks as if it's been there for some time. Next slide, please. And this is from looking back towards Dundee Road, with the house, the application site on the right, and you can see it presents as a well-maintained bungalow. Next slide, please. And looking at the bungalow in a bit more fully, and we can see the land rising behind it fairly steeply. Next slide, please. And that's looking from the road towards the other small bungalow that's adjacent on the other side of the access road. I think that might be all the slides. Yeah, so back to the beginning. I would suggest that while I'm giving my presentation, you look at the picture of the proposed house, which is on page 322 of your papers, which gives a very good indication of the proposal. So it's proposed to extend an existing detached single-storey 8-shade bungalow comprising a living room, dining room, kitchen, bathroom and 4 bedrooms by extending the floor plan and adding an additional storey to form a substantial detached house comprising a lounge, dining room, kitchen, 2 bedrooms, office, garden room and bathroom on the ground floor, and 4 bedrooms, all with ensuite bathrooms, sitting room and sitting area on the upper floor. The extensions will result in a square building which is just under 5 metres in height compared to the 3-metre height of the existing house. The house is situated on a roughly triangular site between the A85 and the M90 and is within statutory green belt. To summarise the applicant's case, the design of the extensions is intended to minimise the visual impact of the extended house by containing the upper floor within the roof and forming a flat roof over the central part. As the house is situated lower than the surrounding roads, the visual impact will be acceptable. To summarise the report of handling, the proposals are radical and will result in a 2.5-storey dwelling house. I would point out this is actually incorrect. I think it might be a typo because what is proposed is a 1.5-storey dwelling house, or a house with 2 floors of accommodation. The extensions will result in the height of the house being raised from its existing 5.8 metres to 8.8 metres. The building would have disjointed features which would add to its visual intrusive form within the landscape. The separate garage which is proposed is also large and does not relate in design terms to the proposed extended house. As the house is within Greenbelt, Policy 43 of the Local Development Plan Greenbelt applies. This requires proposals for extensions to be of a suitable scale or form that they do not detract from the character and landscape setting of the Greenbelt. Placemaking policies 1A and 1B have the aim of securing new development which is harmonious and contribute positively to the surroundings. The proposals will, as it is considered, engulf and erode the simple form and character of the existing cottage, which reflects smallholding architecture, and they are not considered to comply with the Local Development Plan's placemaking policies. The site is within the Sidlow Hills Special Landscape Area. The low-lying sectors of the landscape SLA leading towards the Tay are open. The extension has been designed to maximise views to the north and south, and the building would, in consequence, become a dominant and visually intrusive feature in the landscape. There were no representations received. To turn to material considerations, the policies identified by the case officer and referenced in the reasons for refusal are material. The householder application section of the placemaking supplementary guidance is also a material consideration. It states that extensions should respect the shape, scale and proportions of the existing building, and new roof ridges should not normally exceed the height of the original. Observations on the proposal. The proposed extensions would transform the building and would be visible from the surrounding roads. If the committee is comfortable with the size and massing of the extension in terms of the council's guidance, it needs to consider whether visual impact on the Greenbelt and the site of landscape, special landscape area would be acceptable. Thank you all. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. We'll open up to questions. Bailey McLaren.
I don't actually have any questions. I'm quite happy with Mr. Burton's information. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Councillor James.
Thanks, Convener. Just some clarification. Am I right in thinking that if we were minded to go against the officer's recommendation, we'd need to defer it for an ecological study anyway? Am I correct in that?
That is correct, Councillor. You're right. There's a possibility of requiring a bat survey, which bats are protected species. So it would be remiss of the council to proceed without doing that.
Thank you.
I just have one more question, Mr. Burton. That's just a general question, really. This is obviously in Greenbelt land. In today's, I'm assuming this house was built before that area was classified as Greenbelt. So, assuming it was Greenbelt and there was no house there, what would be our view on building there? Would we like to look at a property being built in there, a property of the new style we're talking about, the proposed two-storey?
I think it would be difficult for the applicant to attempt to justify it against policy.
Thank you for that. So members, obviously questions passed. Can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor. Or do we require more information? Bailey McLaren.
Happy to proceed.
And Councillor James.
Likewise, Convener, thank you.
And I too am happy to proceed. There we are. So we now move to debate, and I'll lead off on this one if I may. This is an unusual one in my mind. We've dealt with extensions and alterations in the past, but looking at this, looking at the properties it is, and looking at the photographs that we have, this is effectively a complete change of the property. The original property, in my mind, would cease to exist. The H shape of the building, which it currently is, would be filled in and squared off. Looking at the photographs here, into a traditional building, we would have a two-storey building in a greenbelt land. As we've said, a building such as this would never be allowed in today's attitude, it being greenbelt land. My thoughts are therefore to go with the planners, to refuse the application, to refuse the appeal. I just feel that it would completely change the very fabric of what's there now, and would create a building which, if it was to be proposed as a new build, would never be passed by planners. And therefore, I uphold the decision of planners and refuse the appeal. Bailey McLaren.
Thank you. Well, my thoughts are very much echoing yours, Councillor Braun. The proposal is for a complete change of design, as you state, and it would make the property to be very dominant, and the shape, scale, and proportion is just doesn't fit with the area, the character of the area. So I too would vote to uphold the officer's decision of refusal. Yeah, I uphold the refusal.
Councillor James.
Looks like it's going to be another full house then, convener. Not a lot I can add. I have sympathy with the applicant, if I'm honest. If it wasn't in the position it's in, I would be quite minded to accept his proposal to change the building. However, it is Greenbelt area, and this building would dominate the area, and would definitely go against the policy. So therefore, I uphold the planning officer's decision to refuse. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. We now have another unanimous decision, Mr. Elliott.
Thank you, Convener. Take you to page 335, which are the original grounds of refusal by the planning officer, the appointed officer. Just you have unanimously refused the review application. I just want to check whether you're looking for any changes. There was no direct indication of any change to those grounds.
Not really, but I think number 3 could be reworded slightly different to give a more defined reason why, and the wording I would consider would be the proposed extension, in view of its height and massing, would over-dominate the existing house, contrary to the Perth and Kinross placemaking guide 2020, and to the detriment of the immediate area and to the house itself.
Okay, I think Councillor Braun is proposing a rewording of ground of refusal 3, making it more arguably more focused on the need for in relation to an extension. Does Councillor McLaren and Councillor James agree?
Yes, I agree.
I too agree, Mr. Elliott. Thank you.
Thank you very much, members. That upholds the decision of planners. So we now move on to item 4.5. This is a formation of camping and caravan site, erection of office, cafe, shop building, WC, shower building and a pergola, formation of play and parking areas and associated works, land 100 metres west of Alex Butter Landscaping Limited, West Countley Farm, Kinderlaken. If I can ask Mr. Burton, sorry. Right, okay. Excuse my pronunciation. I'll ask Mr. Burton now to introduce the case.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take you through the pictures first. You can see the site on the screen there. It's outlined in red. It's adjacent to the landscape and business, which is just to the south of it. You can see there are kind of polytunnels that are there. There's woodland on 3 sides of it, and you can see how close the A9 is. The access road to it is through the woodland towards the existing access road to the landscaping works. If we could take the first slide, please. That is that's on the road just off the A9, and it's showing the access, the entrance to Alex Butter Landscaping, which is where the access to the site would be as well. Next slide, please. That's the road which rises through the woods. It's a single track road, as you can see, It's mostly surfaced, and it's a fair length to the site itself. Next slide, please. At the end of the access road, this is looking towards the site. On the left-hand side of the picture is the landscaping business, and on the right-hand side there's a bit of a car parking area, fields, and beyond these fields to the right there is farmland. Next slide, please. And that's closer into the site. This is looking towards the area on the right-hand side there where the office building would be. Beyond that, on the green space that you can see, that's where the children's play area is proposed. Next slide, please. And this is looking into the site past the landscaping business on the left-hand side. You can see a gate at the end of the access there along the mown path. Next slide, please. And this is the gate to the site itself. So the site lies, the site of the caravans and pitches lies beyond that fence. Next slide, please. This is standing just inside that gate that we looked at. You can see the site's quite well defined. It's undulating, but you can see how it could accommodate the proposal quite comfortably. Next slide, please. That's looking along the edge of the site. You can see there's a number of trees on the site. There's also a number of trees very close to the boundary of the site, some of which could potentially be affected by the proposal. Next slide, please. And looking down southwards towards the A9, you can see there's a significant tree planting or a significant woodland bordering the site on that side. Next slide, please. And this is looking towards the edge of the site with the boundary with Alec Butter Landscaping. I think that might be all the slides. Oh no, one more. This is looking back from the site towards the access. The office building would be on the left-hand side of this picture, just slightly opposite the polytunnels you see there. Next slide, please. That's it. Okay. So the proposal is for a camping and caravan site, including an office, cafe, and shop, and play and parking areas 100 metres west of Alex Butter Landscaping. A small shower WC block is also proposed close to the camping pitches. So 15 caravan pitches and 10 tent pitches are proposed, and a group camping area in the open field immediately to the west of the landscaping business. A single-storey timber-clad building containing cafe, farm shop and office is proposed at the entrance to the site. The site is part of the farm used by Alex Butter Landscaping and is surrounded to the north and west by mature woodland and to the east by open rough grazing land. The parts of the site which are not designated pitches would be meadow with wildflowers, patches of herbs and vegetables and fruit trees. The sites would be bookable for touring caravans and motorhomes, and no permanently sited caravans are envisaged. To summarise the applicant's case, the applicant would have been happy to provide the information which the case officer states was required. The applicant's business is already diversified. It's been in existence since 1971 and has survived by constantly diversifying. The applicant has interest in other holiday parks at Tummel Valley, Fascally, Invermill and Milton of Fonab, and is aware of the growing trend for holidaying in motorhomes, caravans and tents. The idea behind this application is to create a campsite with a wild camping feel, with wildflowers, foraging patches, long grass and natural play area created on an area of poor quality farmland. It's grade 4.2. In terms of locational need, which is the second reason for refusal, the location of the site close to the A9 and the heart of rural Perthshire means it's well placed to accommodate north and southbound visitors. No tree survey was submitted, as mentioned in the third reason for refusal, because the proposals would have no impact on any existing trees, as confirmed in the design statement. New tree planting is also proposed. Biodiversity and lack of ecological survey, which forms reason 4 of the refusal. Notice the applicant has worked on the site for the last 22 years and no impact on local wildlife is expected. Flood risk is brought up at reason 5. It's accepted that the access is within the functional floodplain, although there is an alternative access which can be used in the event of a flood. The applicant is aware of the ground conditions on site and is confident that a solution can be arrived at to resolve any surface water issues and the issue identified on the SEPA flood map. The applicant would be happy for a condition to be attached with regard to this. Traffic and transport, which forms reason 7 of the reasons for refusal. The applicant supplies figures of likely vehicle movements associated with the proposed use. 10 camper vans per week and approximately 56 to 70 movements per day associated with the farm shop. The council's core path network passes the front of the site. This is also a Sustrans long distance cycle route. The entrance to the site, including signage, could easily be improved, and the access driveway from the main road could be enhanced by adding passing places. All of the land is within the applicant's control. To summarise the report of handling, 17 local development plan policies are identified as being relevant to the proposal. I don't intend to list them all here. In addition, supplementary guidance on placemaking, flood risk and assessment and developer contributions, and developer contributions are also identified. Policy 1 of TAPLAN and Policy 6 of the local development plans seek to guide new development into existing settlements. Policies 8, Policy 8, rural business diversification, and Policy 9, caravan site and chalets, allow certain exceptions to be made to this. Policy 8 requires development with the settlement to offer opportunities to diversify an existing business or to be related to a site-specific resource or opportunity. Policy 9C is favourable to new caravan chalet developments where they're not to be used as permanent residences. They must also involve the expansion of an existing hotel or caravan park, replace static caravans with more permanent structures, or meet a specific need by virtue of its quality or location. The proposal does not, it's considered meet the former 2 requirements of Policy 9C, and no documentation has been provided which demonstrate that the proposal meets a specific need, as there are similar facilities in the area. The supporting documentation indicates that the proposed use would be a new enterprise, but offers little supporting information. There's no information regarding rural diversification. To do so, the application should have been accompanied by a business plan demonstrating how the new business relates to the landscape nursery business and how it justifies the size of the site and the number of pitches proposed. The proposal represents use of an undeveloped greenfield site, and the council cannot agree to such proposals without sufficient supporting information to enable it to be fully assessed against development plan policies. The site is relatively flat and well contained by mature woodland and is considered to accord with placemaking policies, and it is not possible with the information provided to assess the impact the proposals might have on local residents. No supporting information has been provided to allow the council to ensure the site is suitable in terms of traffic generation and access for the proposed development. This view is confirmed by the council's Transport Planning Service, who state they cannot support the application without additional information on the access onto the public road network and the access track between the road and the application site. The lack of information on potential links from the site to establish walking and cycle routes means that the proposal has been taken as contrary to Policy 8 of the Local Development Plan, Criteria B of which seeks to discourage new developments which would have unsustainable travel patterns. No information has been provided on the ecology of the site, so it's been impossible to assess the potential impact on local wildlife and habitats. Policy 41 of the LDP seeks to safeguard these, so the application is considered to be contrary to that policy. The application does not include information on trees on or adjacent to the site which would be affected by the development, so it's been impossible to assess its potential impact in that regard. Accordingly, the proposal is taken to be contrary to Policy 40B of the LDP, which requires a tree survey to be undertaken for developments with trees on or adjacent to the site. Policy 52 of the LDP carries a presumption against proposals for developments on floodplains. The SEPA flood map shows that the access road is within the functional floodplain of the Kinderlachen burn. As this is the only vehicular access identified, the site would be inaccessible in the event of a flood. Approval of this application might increase the number of people in flood risk areas with no safe access or egress. The SEPA flood maps also show part of the application site to be at risk from surface water flooding. Due to the lack of information provided about this or how it could be controlled, the proposal is taken to be contrary to Policy 52 of the Local Development Plan. The lack of information on surface water drainage is also contrary to Policy 53C of the Local Development Plan, which requires the submission of a drainage impact assessment in such cases. So following the above assessment, the application was refused with 7 reasons for refusal. 8 representations were received, including comments from Dunkeld and Burnham Community Council, citing road safety and traffic generation, impact on amenity, noise pollution, out of character with the area, contrary to the development plan, commercial impact on existing business, ecological impact, visual impact design, and impact on trees. The policies, in terms of material considerations, the policies identified by the case officer are all relevant material considerations. Of the considerations raised by the representations, only the commercial impact of an existing business is not a relevant consideration. Observations on the application. The application should have been accompanied by a transport assessment, drainage impact assessment, ecological assessment, including habitat assessment, a flood risk assessment, and a tree survey identifying any trees which could be impacted. The applicant has attempted to rectify some of the above in the statement to the local review body, but the required documents mentioned would need to be properly assessed by the relevant parties: the Council's Transport Planning Service, the Council's Ecology Officer, and the Council's Arborist, and the Scottish Environmental Protection Agency. That concludes my report. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. Councillor James, any questions?
No, thanks, Convener. That was quite constructive. Very good. Thank you.
Thank you. Bailey McLaren?
No, I don't have any questions. A very concise report. Thank you.
Thank you. And I have no questions either on this occasion. So members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor James?
No, happy to proceed. Thanks, Convener.
And Bailey McLaren?
Happy to proceed also.
I'm happy myself as well. So mustn't forget me. So members, we can move to debate. Can I ask Councillor James, having considered the applicant's papers, report of handling, Perth and Kinross local development plan and all other relevant material planning considerations, to start?
Yeah, thanks, Convener. And this is a real difficult one, and another one that I'm caught between a rock and a hard place. I love the idea, if I'm honest, and had all the information been in place, it might have been a different outcome for me. But however, there's the information that's missing. It is, for our officers to make a decision is what worries me. You could defer it, but I think deferring it would waste time. It would be easier to refuse and see what happens. But too much information to be able to agree with the applicant. Too much missing, should I say? So I have to agree with the officer's assessment in this case and refuse the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. If I may add my comments now, I too think it looks like a good concept. An idea is there, and the location seems to lend itself to something along these lines. But looking at the reasons for referral in this, there are seven reasons given, and in each one it is purely for lack of information, information not provided over those 7 refusals. And I think, to be honest, I think that the best way forward in my mind would be to refuse the appeal and to have this start as a completely new application. That may speed things along. It may give the application a strengthening to be looked at. But whilst I say I think it's a good concept, there's a concept there. I think something to look at. This lack of information is just letting the whole thing down. It's not for me to decide who's at fault. It's just there. There's just not the information to allow planners to make the decision. I know a comment was made in some of the paperwork that we could grant the application on condition, with conditions for all these things. I'm not happy to do that. I think that would open the door to, it implies that we will allow the site to be developed, and I don't think that's a decision that certainly this panel should make. That's for planners to decide. So in my opinion, we should refuse the application, as you've said, Councillor James, and ask them to resubmit a complete new application with the supporting information that now is clearly stated that they need. Bailey McLaren.
Thank you. Well, I too, it's really disappointing, the lack of information that is supporting this appeal, and because I would love to be able to see this come to fruition, because the concept, the location ticks lots of boxes, but we wouldn't be doing our duties correctly to defer either. And I agree that to uphold the refusal and allow the applicant to regroup and bring an application to the planning committee fully supported with the necessary information. And at this point in time, an ecology survey, you know, sensibly speaking, you wouldn't be able to carry that out till next year. So that in itself, the process would be delayed for 18 months, possibly, if we deferred. So the sensible conclusion is to uphold the refusal and allow the applicant to come back. Thank you.
Thank you, Bailey McLaren. So, Mr. Elliott, we seem to have another unanimous decision this morning on this one.
Yes, Convener. Take your attention to page 385, 386 of your papers. Those are the 7 grounds of refusal being referred to. I didn't hear anything suggested about changes to that. As far as I understand, it's refused in line with the original grounds of refusal.
That's my understanding. I think we all agreed on that. Thank you. So, members, we'll now move on to the next paper this morning, which is item 4.6. I believe you're related. You're the agent for this one. Yeah, thank you. So I'll ask Mr. Burton if you could introduce this one for us. This is the erection of a dwelling house in principle and land 20 metres north of Powderwells Farm in New Ayleth. Mr. Burton.
Thank you, Chair. You'll be glad to know that the remaining 2 applications are much shorter. My presentations are much shorter anyway. I'm glad of that. I'll take you through the pictures first. The site is, you have to look closely at that on the screen up ahead, is outlined in red. It's an open countryside on the north side of an access road which leads to leads beyond it to a cottage, but also on the south side of the road is an old farmhouse which has consent for renovation for a standing conversion, and a new house. There's an existing farmhouse in that group, so there will be 3 houses there when that is implemented. Next slide, please. So that's standing very close to the application site, looking back along the access road. On the left-hand side, you can see part of the steading, which, as I said, has consent for conversion, but at the moment is unoccupied. Next slide, please. And this is looking at the site itself, with the corner of the unoccupied steading to the left there. You can see there are structures on site. You can see there's the remains of a concrete wall with what appears to be metal poles through it. So clearly a larger structure at some point. Next slide, please. And this is looking into the site and the land beyond. The site's split in two. You can see that there's a flat, what looks to be a concrete platform with low walls surrounding it, and on the other side of that, of where you put the row of metal poles, is the remainder of the site. Next slide, please. And that's looking at the site from slightly further away, so you can see the remains of buildings quite clearly visible, and the flatter area, which was in the previous slide, you can see beyond the metal poles. Next slide, please. That's looking into the site, the left-hand portion of the site, and the farmland beyond. You can see the farmland right about it is quite open. Next slide, please. And that's the unoccupied farm buildings which have consent for conversion to a steading, and to the right-hand edge of that picture is the site of a new house, which is also consented. There's an existing farmhouse which you can just see the chimney of at the rear of that picture. So there will be three dwellings there when that application is implemented. I think that's all of the slides, so we can return to the fact. Thank you. So this is an application for planning permission in principle, and it's for a single house on land previously occupied by buildings associated with the farmsteading on the other side of the access road at Powder Wells Farm near Alith. The application site is surrounded to the northeast and west by open countryside, and to the south by the vacant former farm buildings that you've seen in the pictures. The farmsteadings have consent granted in May 2022 for two houses, one a conversion of the existing buildings and one a new build house. In addition, there's an existing farm cottage adjacent to the two dwellings given consent. The application site is on the opposite side of the road from the farmsteading and has the remains of structures which clearly formed part of the working farm in the past. There appear to be two structures, of which concrete hard standings, foundations and low walls remain. To summarise the applicant's case, the application should be assessed against Policy 19 of the Local Development Plan, Housing in the Countryside. That policy supports proposals for the erection of single houses in the countryside which fall into 6 categories, the 6th of which is development on rural brownfield land. The adopted supplementary guidance on housing in the countryside carries specific guidance in this category. Rural brownfield land is defined there as derelict land which was at one time occupied by buildings and structures which have been removed, or land directly linked to former buildings and structures which has been so damaged by a former use that it cannot be left to naturalise or be reused for another purpose without being improved. The guidance adds that proposals will be considered under this category for sites which have either been completely cleared of all buildings and structures, or where some foundations remain, providing that buildings above ground level have been removed. It's contended that the application site is exactly the site the policy and the supplementary guidance supports. A small-scale housing proposal on derelict land which was at one point occupied by buildings or structures which have been removed, or where some foundations remain. The report of handling justifies the refusal on the basis that there's no evidence that the site is contaminated to the extent that it must be remediated. The supplementary guidance does not require a contaminated land investigation to be submitted in all cases, and it's not considered that such an investigation would have added anything to the consideration of a derelict brownfield site that could not be left to naturalise, and hence complies with the guidance in the supplementary guidance. It's noted that the Environmental Health Service's response to the application recommends a condition be applied to any consent requiring a contamination evaluation to be carried out. The applicants would be happy with such a condition. The proposal is considered to meet the requirements of Category 6 of policy and the supplementary guidance. To summarise the report of handling, the report assesses the proposal against Policy 19 of the Local Development Plan. The site appears to comply with the definition of brownfield land in the policy and accompanying supplementary guidance. No evidence has been submitted, however, that shows that the site is contaminated to the extent that it must be remediated. The intention of Category 6 of the policy and guidance is to allow development on cleared sites which have been significantly degraded by a former use, to the extent that the development of a house is the only means by which it is viable to remediate the site. The site has not been demonstrated to be in such a poor condition that it requires to be remediated. That is, its condition is causing a risk to human health or the wider environment. No representations were received to the application. Material considerations. The overriding material consideration is Policy 19 of the Local Development Plan and supporting supplementary guidance. Category 6 of the policy concerns the development of rural brownfield land, which the applicant and the case officer both agree defines the application site. Observations on the proposal. The decision to be made on this application and the difference of opinion between the applicant and the case officer hinges on the second paragraph of the supplementary guidance, which I can read out to committee if you'd like. Bear with me. It's vanished from my. Right. Category 6. Category 6 is specifically about development on rural brownfield land. This is Category 6 of the supplementary guidance on housing in the countryside. The second paragraph is titled, "When will development be permitted?" And it reads, "Many sites which were formerly occupied by buildings have little or no environmental impact and can be left to return to a natural state over time. Even sites where some contamination is present may not require to be remediated if there is no significant risk to human health or the wider environment. This category of the policy is not intended to allow the redevelopment of sites like these, nor is it intended to permit the redevelopment of sites for housing where buildings have been simply allowed to fall into disrepair. This category is intended to allow small-scale housing proposals on clear sites which have been significantly degraded by a former use or activity, and where the redevelopment of the site for housing is the only means by which it's viable to remediate the site." So that, I would suggest, is what the case hinges on, and that is what the committee will need to decide. Is whether the committee will need to decide whether the application meets that or does not. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. So I'll open up for questions. Bailey McLaren. Any questions?
Is the field that surrounds this site in the same ownership of the applicant? i.e., could it be returned to a field agricultural use, if possible?
That's information I don't have, Councillor, I'm afraid, about the ownership. Looking at the site, when I was on the site visit, I think it would be difficult to return it to agricultural use.
Thank you.
Councillor James.
Just one bit of it. I don't know if it's a curveball or whatever or something. Would you say that this area, Ailith, is it a special landscape area? Or it's not a designed landscape, but would you say it's a special area, or could be considered that way?
I don't think it's been designated as a site of special landscape value, or special landscape area, rather.
I just wanted to clarify, Mr. Burton, what you were saying. We can't use the other properties as a group at this stage, is that because they've just not been developed? Can't look at it from that point of view.
I don't think that you could call the vacant farm building to the south and the building beyond that as a group in a way that would help this application. I think it might well be different when that application to convert the farmsteading into build a new dwelling there, when that is implemented. Although it should be said that this site is on the opposite side of the access road from that. So that would have to be addressed in the justification.
Fine, thank you very much. So members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Bailey McLaren?
Happy to proceed.
And Councillor James?
So am I, convener. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, and I too am happy to proceed. So we'll move forward. And as I normally like to try and switch everybody around who leads, but I think unfortunately I switched us around last time, Councillor James. So I'll lead on this one, as I showed on the last one. This hinges totally on category 6, as we've mentioned. Having heard it read in full from you, Mr. Burton, I'm inclined, I think, on this occasion to go with the refusal of the officers. It's a very full category, but in this instance, hearing it read through and looking at the pictures and the photographs, I think I'd have to concur with the planning officer and agree the refusal. And I think that's my position on this one, I'm afraid. I can't see that I can find any reason to change that, having heard the full category read out. So I'm of an opinion to go with a refusal. Bailey McLaren.
This is a tricky decision to make actually on this one, and it's I'm noting what Ross has stated about the buildings across which have been recently planning has been granted there. So the period in time which that process that hasn't started, I'm actually going to. I think I'm more inclined to be disagreeing with our officers and proposing overturning the decision on the condition. I think we'd have to put in a condition about the contamination.
Mr. Elliott, you want to come in?
Yes, just to clarify, maybe better if this was done during questioning, but we are where we are. In terms of contaminated land and in terms of the supplementary guidance category 6, there should be a contaminated land investigation and remediation plan submitted as part of any planning application. Because it's environmental information, you would require that before you actually come to a decision. So that would lead to a deferral rather than to a grant condition. It's not something you would condition. You would have to defer and ask for it now. Is that clear enough?
Convener, could I rephrase? I would propose to defer asking for a contamination vote.
That's there. When we ask for deferral, my understanding is we have to defer at that point. Any one of us asks for it. Is that correct? Or do I?
We've slightly got out of procedure. It's not absolute, convener. It depends on the reasons for deferral. But you want to pass on to Councillor James, and we'll come back on that.
Yeah. Councillor James, can I have your view on this, please?
Yeah, thanks, convener. I've been here desperately trying to read Housing in the Countryside guidance, and thanks to Ross's reading of paragraph 2 of that category. I was looking at the requirements in there, and it says proposals will be considered under this category. This is for category 6. But at the bottom of that paragraph, it also states sites which have buildings remaining, including ruinous buildings. A bit tenuous, but there is a wall there, albeit it's a ruined wall. So if it's ruinous, it can be assessed under category 4 or 5. And if you go to category 5, page 21 of the Housing in the Countryside Act, ruinous houses. Replacement of a ruinous house will be permitted where all of the following criteria are met. There's 3 criteria: substantial evidence of the structure of the original building above ground level to enable its size and form to be identified. I think that's there because you can see the outline of a building. It's an established site with a good setting and a good fit in the landscape, which is there are another building with planning permission, and the existing site boundaries are capable of providing a suitable enclosure. Bearing in mind what Bailey McLaren has just said about the contaminated land, which we are missing, I'd agree with her to defer for a contaminated land report. Also, sorry, one of the reasons for refusal, I would have some difficulty agreeing that it's not part of a building group. I know it's an empty building at the moment, but it does have planning permission, and it is, to all intents and purposes, it's not ruinous. It's a stood building, and there's one, 50 yards down the road. So I would struggle with the building, not being part of a building group. But anyway, I would go with Bailey McLaren on this one. Thank you.
Mr. Elliott, if you could come in now.
Thank you, Convener. Just in terms of category 5, Councillor James, obviously that was one category that wasn't given a lot of detailed attention either by the report, the officer or the applicant, as far as I recollect. But in terms of that would be, and also in terms of building group, that would be for a future decision. What you're indicating, I think it's quite clear now, at least 2 members want to defer in relation to category 6 in the Brownfield land. And I think what I need to now do is properly narrate that. And I think it's defer for the applicant to produce I'm looking at the wording in category 6. So, contaminated land investigation and remediation plan. And secondly, that I think undoubtedly you would then need to allow development management and the council's contaminated land officer to be able to comment on that information. And of course that would return, the applicant of course can make return comment under the rules and it would then come back to a future meeting of the board. So essentially you're deferring for the applicant to produce a contaminated land investigation and remediation plan and allowing development management and the council's contaminated land officer to comment on that information, and then it comes back to you. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, members. And again, it shows us we're not always unanimous, which is the way it is. So we'll now move on to item 4.7, which is the last paper of the day. I believe the applicant's agent is with us again for the day. So I will again ask Mr. Burton to look at this. Now, item 4.7 is erection of a dwelling house in principle, land 60 metres north of Nowhead House. Bendicky, I believe is the right pronunciation. And I'll pass Mr. Burton to introduce.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take you through the pictures first, as usual. You can see the application site on the screen there. It's a large triangular site to the north of the house you can see, which is Nowhead House. To the south of Nowhead House, there's a roughly triangular field between that and the road you can see marked out. There are 2 houses currently under construction in that field at the moment, and the access road to the site you can see going round the bottom of that that area, that part of the site, and it then goes up the side of of Nowhead House on the east side of Nowhead House into the site. So first slide, please. That's the road leading up to that. That's the road to Nowhead House. That's the access to it. You can just see on the right-hand side. Next slide, please. And Nowhead House driveway is straight on. To the right, there is the access to the new houses, the two new houses, one of which you can see on the right-hand side of the picture. It's also that would also form the access to the application site. Next slide, please. You can see clearly the second of the two new houses getting built there, and the driveway which goes around the front of these new houses. Next slide, please. That's slightly further into the site, showing the driveway. Next slide, please. And then round the corner of the driveway, that's obviously the corner of one of the new houses, looking back down the driveway, which turns right towards the main road. Next slide, please. And that's the rear of one of the two houses getting built. So the driveway for the application site would come round the side of that new house and would continue to where the picture's taken from. Next slide, please. And then the hedge you see on the left-hand side is the split between Nowhead House maintained garden, if you like, and the application site. So this is looking into the application site itself. And then the next slide, you can see just slightly further inside, you can see these posts which are marked to show the access driveway as envisaged for the new house, leading to the development site, which would be in the cleared area just beyond the little group of trees on the right-hand side of the picture there. Next slide, please. That's looking back towards the access. You can see the posts again there. Next slide, please. And that's looking straight up the application site. The proposed, the indicative drawings for the house show the house to be pretty much where these two single trees are, perhaps slightly beyond that. So you can see that the site is substantial and there'll be a very large garden area behind it. I think that's all the slides. Oh no, one more, sorry. Yeah, that's looking down from towards Nowhead House. So you can see there's a kind of pathway through fairly mature hedging and trees to the house. I think that's all the slides now. Yep, that's us. So the application is for a dwelling house in principle, and the drawing showing the location of the proposed house is not part of the application. It's indicative only. It's just showing where a new house could potentially be situated. The application site is extended garden ground, as in not original garden ground, associated with a substantial detached house in the countryside north of Cooperangus. The site is triangular in shape and extends to 0.9 of a hectare. It's bounded to the east and west by open countryside, to the south by Nowhead House and two detached houses currently under construction. The site's accessed via a driveway which is shared with the two new houses, which sits slightly to the southeast of Nowhead House. To summarise the applicant's case, despite placemaking being a reason for refusal, the handling report states that there are no placemaking issues. The site is well screened and in an established site and would not affect the character or amenity of the area. It's clearly definable and is adjacent to the existing grouping. The grounds of Nowhead House are extensive and form an appropriate landscape setting to accommodate the proposal. To summarise the report of handling, the report of handling makes it clear the proposal is contrary to placemaking policies 1A and 1B in that the application site is not within or adjacent to a building group. Nowhead House, Nowhead Cottage and the two new houses currently under construction can be said to form a group, as the two new houses are located in between and close to the two existing houses. The application site cannot reasonably be viewed as a viable extension to that grouping, as the proposed house would be approximately 100 metres from Nowhead House and would be isolated and visually detached from the group. The most relevant policy is Policy 19, Housing in the Countryside. The proposal does not accord with the first category, building groups, nor with the category suggested by the applicant's agent, Part 3.1a, existing gardens. To comply with this category, the application site would need to have formed part of the original garden of Nowhead House. It does not. Nowhead House is more akin to a typical farmhouse than a country or estate house, and the area which is now identified as garden ground and which forms the application site was not part of the original garden associated with the house. No representations were received. Material considerations, Policy 19, Housing in the Countryside, is the most relevant material consideration. If the proposal were to be taken to be in accord with that, with other policies, I'll read that again. If the proposal were to be taken in accord with that policy, other policies such as placemaking could be considered. The only observations I have is that the application site does not form part of the original garden of Nowhead House, which retains its original garden area out with the application site. Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. We'll open up to questions now. I have one. It's a substantial amount of ground for one house, is my thoughts on this one.
It's a large site for one house, just under a hectare. A fairly large housing site is about 400 square metres, so this is a lot larger than that.
Thank you. Lady McLaren, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
And Councillor James.
Sorry, I turned my camera off. I had issues with the Wi-Fi. No questions, thanks, convener.
Thank you very much. Members, then can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us, that is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require any more information? Lady McLaren.
Happy to proceed.
And Councillor James.
Likewise, convener, happy to proceed.
And we'll now move to debate. Lady McLaren, would you like to lead off on this one?
Thank you, convener. After listening to Ross's presentation, I am agreeing to uphold the decision of the officers on as the property, the suggested area was not part of the original garden ground, and the other group of houses are too far away to form a grouping. So for these reasons, I will agree with our officers and uphold their decision.
Thank you, Lady McLaren. Councillor James.
For the sake of brevity, I agree with everything Councillor McLaren's just said, and I too agree. This is in principle, you know, would we be happy in principle to put a house there and maybe some more houses there? In principle, no, I wouldn't be happy for everything that Councillor Bailey McLaren has said. So I'd uphold the officer's decision.
Thank you, Councillor James. I hope you get your picture back on soon, because it's not a very flattering photograph of you at the moment on the screen. My decision obviously is now, well, I won't say it's irrelevant, but it's a 2-to-1 decision, but I do concur with you both, I'm afraid, on this one. I looked at it very carefully, but the garden, it isn't part of the original garden ground, which is fair enough, and that's a point well taken. The property is 100 metres away from the group. And just 100 metres is just, I think, just too far. That's what, 320, 130 feet. It just seems too far away from Nowhead House. So on this occasion, I think I'd have to uphold the the decision of the planners for both reasons. Although it's already a 2-2 decision anyway, but I will concur with you, so we'll make it unanimous on this occasion. So, Mr. Elliott, to you for this.
Thank you, Convener. I think that's clear, unanimous decision to refuse the review application. Now take you to page 539, which is the original grounds of refusal by the planning officer. Are you wishing any changes to those grounds?
Yeah, I just think a little bit more information at the end of the first grounds for refusal. I was thinking of something along the lines of, in particular, the proposed dwelling house would not form part of a building group or an extension to it, nor is it within the garden ground with the existing country estate house. I think that's what that was roughly my points there. So it's just an expansion of the reasons why we're doing that.
Okay, Councillor Braun is indicating a kind of justification, I would say, being added to ground of refusal reason number 1. Do Councillors, Bailey McLaren and Councillor James agree?
Agreed.
Agree.
Fine, that brings us to the end of our meeting today. Thank you very much to Bailey McLaren and Councillor James for participating. Thank you for all our other officers who've helped make this work today, Mr. Elliott, Mr. Burton, of course, as well, and Jessica at the end for all her help in preparing the paperwork. But my only comment at the end, which Councillor James touched on, and I would reiterate again, as I mentioned at the last local review body, is a request that planners could please start visiting application sites. I know we stopped before COVID, but as I said before, COVID is now over. So I would ask perhaps if planners would now start to consider visiting sites as a matter of course. We've dealt with 7 applications this morning, and as Councillor James said again, I think earlier, that none of these has actually been visited by a planning officer. So I would reiterate that point again, please. COVID is over. We need to get back to normality now. But thank you, members. We're now finished. Good day. Thank you very much.